and we'll start. Okay, Felix Candela, whose birthday was just a few days ago, a very, very important engineer, born in Spain and activating, living in Mexico. So he was a Spanish and Mexican architect, was born in Madrid, and at the age of 26, immigrated to Mexico, acquiring double nationality. He's known for his significant role in the development of Mexican architecture and structural engineering. Candela's major contribution to architecture was the development of thin shells made out of reinforced concrete, popularly known as cascarons. He was one of Santiago Calatrava's teachers and has had a great influence on his works. So this is the man. He does look, if I could say, a little bit like an engineer, but my statement is superficial. Really, he smokes like a painter and like a poet, like an artist, nervously, trying to handle his emotions through smoking. Some drawings I go kind of quickly now because this is not really the object of today's celebration, but I think something will gain, I hope, will be gained. So, you would say these are engineering drawings. Why are you showing them to us? Because they are beautiful. That's why. Because yes, they are rational, but they are also magnificently irrational because you can tell clearly that this man was also considering aesthetics. And just like in mathematics, where a great equation or a great solution to a mathematical problem is solved also in beauty terms, is the same in engineering. A great engineer, I think, goes beyond, in a way, the measurableness of engineering. And there is, you will see buildings built by Candela that are works of art, works of architecture. Okay, so we began with this pavilion of cosmic rays. Well, I don't know exactly why it was called so, but even the title now is not what you would expect from an engineering work. And indeed, it is an architectural work where the engineering is manifesting itself openly and honestly, because this is what engineers do. They cannot lie. I mean, the essence of the job is to go against, facile manipulations. It's about, the essence of what engineering is. So when they achieve aesthetical values, all for the better. And sometimes they do. Brilliant engineers, I think, are at heart poets, just like brilliant mathematicians. Brilliant anything, actually. Gardener, even a bricklaying person. If he does the job properly, he's a poet. This is what I believe. And it doesn't matter you work with words or with bricks. In essence, it's about transcending the limitations inherent in your job and aspiring towards something higher. Anyway, so this is a building by Candela, another one from 1952. I mean, look at this roof. It's splendid. It's floating. It's on the other hand, you see how it is done. It respects the laws of statics, but it is also aesthetics. Ethics and aesthetics are united in the work of a beautiful engineering work. I am not an engineer, far from it, but I'm kind of against Walter Gropius, despite my respect and affection for him, because he said, well, architecture begins where engineering ends. And I don't think it's quite like this, Mr. Gropius. I mean, maybe many times it's like this, unfortunately, but I think in the best of the cases, engineering becomes architecture. And I mean, it's enough to consider the Gothic cathedrals. I mean, can you separate the engineering from architecture? I don't think you can. All right, I didn't have pictures for that one. This is a church he built, and he was the designer, not just the engineer. There was no engineer, and there was no architect for this church. It was just him. He was the author of this church in concrete, exposed concrete, but look at the interior. It's dramatic, it's sculptural. The man was also a sculptor, no doubt. Look at this. Look at this. Look at these columns. In fact, if I contemplate just this portion of the church, which is structural, I almost see kind of a large-scale version of a bird by Constantin Brâncuș. The base, the leg, and then aspiring towards the above of the so-called bird. And yeah, I think at best, when we are at best as human beings, and it doesn't matter what we do, even brooming the floor could be, I think, an activity that connects you with approximately, we could call the above. If you do it almost religiously, if you broom the floor religiously, you are a poet, and you are serving the above or the below. I don't want to differentiate between the beyond. Maybe this is a better word. If you broom the floor properly, you are a poet and you are serving the beyond. This is what I believe. Anyway, but look at this. I mean, what architect in the world or any sensitive person would not take his or her hat off in front of this magnificent interior? It's splendid. It's not adorned. It doesn't need to. It's like the inner beauty of someone who doesn't need makeup. It's just structure, but look at this. It's spectacular. The space is interesting. The forms are interesting. There is expression, and this came from a vision. I would say that actually the interior is superior to the exterior. And he himself said that the church should be pleasing enough to invite people in, but inside the building is where the summum of the building should be, because that's where you encounter God. And I think this building succeeds in doing this. I mean, when you look at this image, you would say this is a stage design for an expressionistic movie from the beginning of the 20th century. It's not. It's a church built by the Spanish engineer Felix Candela in Mexico. And he built, again, this is something worth contemplating, a good number of churches. So there. It's about attaining an expressive interior space, a surrounding sculpture that one admires from the inside. But this sculpture cannot be capricious and arbitrary, since one has to respond to the external laws of a structural equilibrium. Of course, he does talk like an engineer. This is what someone else said about his work. The peculiar quality of the church resided in the fact that it was a highly individualistic architectural statement, but one such as could never have been conceived or at least executed by a contemporary architect, for it was first of all an engineering play of great sophistication. I never witnessed an indifferent reaction to it. Its effect was such that almost overnight, as it seemed, Candela became known as the leading practitioner of shell design in the world. Not a little thing. So we are moving forward, learning from an engineer ourselves to have a big heart, because at bottom it's about this, having a big heart. If you have a big heart and you manifest it in your work, you achieve, I think, appreciable results. Okay. So we saw this church. We have to rush a little bit because it's a lot of material. There are 4 presentations tonight. So Felix Candela, Spanish engineer working as an architect and quite creatively in Mexico, and we can learn a lot from him. My presentations have as an intent, as an intention, mainly to emanate or I'm not so interested in sending out information, because information can be found on the web by anyone. Rather to be an invitation, an invitation towards being inspired. That's all. If I succeed in that, I am happy. Another, this is a secular building. Then the covering for the Mexican Stock Exchange. And look at this, it's splendid. It could have been a chapel. Unfortunately, it's for the stock exchange, but the man created a metamorphosis here. You know, in a way, he sabotaged the very function of the building, of the building, because as Charles Baudelaire, the magnificent French poet, said in the 19th century in the poem L'étranger, the stranger, when the poet was asked, what do you love the most, strange man? And he's asked several things, and one of the questions is, do you love gold, meaning money? And he said, I hate it in as much as you hate God. So he places dichotomically money and God. But here we are dealing with a stock exchange room, but the man created a chapel, at least the ceiling. Bravo to him. And look at the people, so-called simple people building this wonder, in a way, engineering, and a good engineering that transcends the measurable. A kiosk pavilion for music. And look at this. When I presented a few days ago, again, Felix Mandela, I expressed total admiration for this ability of this engineer to, compete with gravity. I mean, you could say this is not possible. I mean, this seems like a huge thing hanging in the air, and it does. And it's based on calculations, human calculations, numbers, adding and subtracting and so on. It's magnificent. I love it because it shows the desire of the human being, spirit in will to express can make the great sun seem small, as Louis Kahn said. We see it here. It wants to take off. It wants to become a plane. So what animated this engineer to complicate his life like this? Because he obviously had to complicate his life in order to do this. I think even the trees around it are happy and smiling and congratulating the engineer and the structure for wanting to become nature and fly. Very nice. Now churches, he built several, as you see. We'll go one by one through all of them. What could be more beautiful than an engineer who builds churches alone without an architect? So it's very possible. He did it. Okay, now they're not all very, very impressive or splendid, but there is always in his building something worth contemplating, because it's the purity of the engineer. The engineer, if he is true if he's true to his vocation, he cannot lie. And architects sometimes and maybe often die. This is an interesting church. Unfortunately, I couldn't find favorable views from the outside, a big resolution. But the inside, again, we see the aesthetical results of an engineering that wanted in a way to transcend itself. That is to transform the measurable into the immeasurable, as Louis Kahn would say. Even from the outside, it's kind of interesting. This structure is born from necessity. In other words, it is an engineer's work, but it's not just that, it's also desire. It's not just need, it's also desire. And what is desire? Is what pushes us forward, towards the beyond. Let's call it so. Anyway, he didn't need an architect. This engineer didn't need an architect. He was the architect also. Another church. Look again at this flying roof. also allowing space for the light to enter the building. Bravo to Candela. And look at the drawings, as elegant as the building itself, as elongated and aspiring, as full of desire. What is this desire? Maybe we can use a so-called prosaic word. It's love. That's what it is. It is love, love of the world, love of life, love of building, love of being an engineer, and we can add other things as well. Anyway, but I have to say this. Usually we trust the scientist. We think that only science is rigorous, and we think that poetry is not rigorous. Especially in our time, if science proves the existence of God, we trust him. But if the poet tells us through a very inspired language that God exists because he feels it in his heart, we don't trust him. We don't trust the poet. We think the poet is not rigorous. He's just fantasizing. But it's not true. A good poet is as rigorous as a good engineer. I mean, it's known there are photographs of poets having pyramids of little, pieces of paper with approximations of a word that they try to achieve. It takes immense work and immense dedication and scrupulousness in order to write a good poem. And it's the same with engineering. So, and I would say, coming back to the person brooming the floor, is the same with someone brooming the floor. To broom the floor well, and it's something I'm not at all good at, and I'm actually not even doing it, and I'm terrible, but I have the whole respect for someone who religiously cleans the floor. A great point, I am convinced. Anyway, I look at Candela. Candela, no, an engineer, not rejecting beauty, not rejecting color, not rejecting painting, not rejecting art. It's part of it, a whole. It's a church, a creative church. Now another church, larger. I mean, look at these spiraling curves converging towards this space. It's all in a way, the madness of art, the beauty of art, the vortex of life and art at the same time. And again, look at the wall. It's a wall made of bricks, no, but it doesn't need makeup. Look at this column, because this is what makes the building very special and dynamic. This column is not vertical. It's not vertical, and this is an acknowledgement of the mystery of life in a way, and the dynamic forces of present in nature, present in life, and perhaps also present in faith. Because I believe to have faith means rather to desire to have faith. A faith without any struggles and doubting and so on, to me is not true faith. True faith is the desire for faith. If you have that desire, is already a lot. And this column, in its slanting, has something Hamletian about it. No, it doesn't express a certitude. It expresses a struggle. It's magnificent. What can I say? Bravo, Candela. I mean, look even at that cross. It is slanting too. And the functionalist would say, sure, it's just like paintings in a good museum. The canvas is a little bit, it's not parallel with the wall. It's a little bit facing you at a certain angle, so you can see it better. I don't know. I don't think that's what is happening here. So the people would see, no, it's more complex and also more beautiful. Engineering, look at it. It's splendid. Some markets, because this is the drama in a way of life. On one hand, we aspire towards God, and on the other hand, we need to fill our stomach, and we need the markets. And so he built markets too, not just churches. This is one of them. We see vegetables, fruits. We see the structure of the engineer above. In a way, I could almost say the sacred and the profane, although they exchange roles here. The fruits are sacred, no? The vegetables are sacred. So they're the two sides of the same coin. They are yin and yang. Life needs both. We have the thinking of man, we have the engineer, but we also have the fruits of the earth. Another large market. Sorry for some of these pictures were hard to obtain, but you get a feeling that you see above the structure has nobility and purity, and underneath is what it is, human life. Now we look at a nightclub in Acapulco. You again this very thin shell that almost takes off, and the plan. Look at this, it's thinner than paper, if you allow me to exaggerate a little bit. It's thinner than paper, but it's concrete. And the drawing is equally uplifting and uplifted. Look at this. I mean, too bad in a way that underneath this splendid flying effort, there are the prosaic tables where people eat, but I think in our time, at least, the obsession with eating and with the refrigerator is to be questioned, I think. Especially when you think that there are so many people who have nothing to eat. But when you look at menus and the abundance, the maddening abundance in supermarkets, and a lot of that food ends up in the garbage. The excesses of capitalism, production, consumption. Anyway, the building is good. Not so good is what we see in the front here. This I don't know, consumerist kind of postmodern melodrama, but the building by Felix Candela is still good. A little bit predictable. He built a few structures like this one, and you see it's done with people who are not, master builders probably. Anyway, if the thinking behind the building is correct, then even erecting it is perhaps not so impossible. A chapel, unfortunately, a little bit similar to the restaurant or the club that we saw. But again, the two sides of you need a nightclub, I guess. You need a chapel. The engineer is providing the necessary service. But it is amazing what he was able to do with concrete. Now, that concrete that Frank Lloyd Wright said, Frank Lloyd Wright actually didn't like concrete, and he used it very little in his vast oeuvre. He said concrete is a conglomerate, and I don't know if he was quite right. There were some great works done in concrete, and even his own use of concrete was not bad at all. But there is a little bit of truth in what he said. It's not a very pure material, and unfortunately also provokes a lot of pollution. But much can be done with concrete, yes. And look at the processuality, the process of creating this surface itself is beautiful. This web of this weaving here that took place in order to erect this very pure, thin shell concrete structure. Nice work. Even the birds like it, I'm sure. Now another work. This is some kind of a factory, I think, but it has nobility. I would gladly be a blue-collar worker working in such a factory. Any kind of worker, blue, white, yellow, color, whatever. Look at this. I'm sure Mr. Candela smiled with satisfaction when this was done. All based on the calculations of the engineer poet or the poet engineer. Oh, look at all these men, having no trouble to be suspended in the air on his very audacious structure. Another church. You can tell that there are a few I wouldn't call them necessarily mannerisms, but there is a language here and identifiable as belonging to Felix Candela. You'll see he is very different from Robert Maillard, whose birthday is today, and we'll go straight to him after this quick incursion or excursion into the field, into the works of Felix Candela. Now La Magna, which I don't have pictures of, Church of Our Lady in Madrid. This time in Madrid, he returned to Madrid. Another fine building using concrete in two ways here. Nice work. Parroquia del Señor del Campo Florido in Mexico City. This one, as I said a few days ago, it is maybe, I mean, for my taste, a little bit burlesque, but if you can say something like this for a chapel, probably not. But he was getting older and maybe, I don't know, I should maybe abstain from commenting too much on it. I have seen better works by him, a little bit better. And a palace in Mexico City. This is actually the Palace of Sports for the 1968 Summer Olympics. You know, a large arena. What can we say? An accomplished engineer who worked at, you know, various projects. And now, you know, in 1968, he was already serving, you know, large programs with an optimism that was probably only partly justified. And I will elaborate a little more after we see soon a picture, not so much related to his building, but relating to something else, like this futuristic vehicle in front of the building, or here another picture. You know, what can we do? You know, we associate so-called futuristic buildings with futuristic cars, and as some kind of proofs that progress is unavoidable, that optimism is unavoidable, that the pandemic is unavoidable. In fact, it was not even to be contemplated at all, or the rising levels of the seas, or pollution, or anything. It's just continuous progress and you know, moving towards higher and higher levels of civilization, forgetting what Alvar Aalto said, that architecture belongs to culture, not to civilization. And metro stations in Mexico City, San Lazaro, he built two, as far as I know, large metro stations. So Mexico is not just that country that sends hungry immigrants and thieves to the United States, but it's also a country with an old culture and with levels of sophistication that are not to be neglected. I mean, look at this subway station. Sorry for the resolution, but you can still say that you can still see that you know, this subway station could be enjoyed in any major city of the world, and it was built in Mexico City. Another one also built by Felix Candela in Mexico City. Even here you see modernity, you see the genius of the engineer. You know, I mean, we are almost inside of a you know, modern day Gothic cathedral. It's a subway station. And it's all because of this engineer. Look at these columns, slender and elegant and logical at the same time. So there is civilization in that country, Mr. Trump. There is. And there is also history. There are many things. I mean, Guadalajara invited architects from Daniel Lipskind and Tadao Ando and others to build, and they have their own great architects. I mean, if I'm to mention just Luis Barragan, who received the Pritzker Prize, and Eric Norton, contemporary architect, was once here on Zoom some months ago. Anyway, And this is a building he built in Valencia, not far away from where his pupil, Santiago Calatrava, built what he built, not very modestly. But this is a little bit predictable what Felix Candela did. Anyway, probably invited by his beloved pupil, Santiago Calatrava. And this is the last picture of them. On the right, you see Felix Candela, on the left, the young Santiago Calatrava. Okay, and now we go to the man who was born today, and a very important engineer, but this time Swiss. I'm talking about Robert Maillard. Robert Maillard, slideshow. Okay. So, born on February 6, 1872, a little bit older than Le Corbusier, for example, Robert Maillard. But you'll see that this man who was born in, 1872, my God, and died before the Second World War, he built astonishingly modern structures. He was, as I read, he was also an artist, and it's obvious he was because of the way he designed the structures he built. From what I read, amusingly, he was not a good student in school. He studied engineering, but he was not good. Of course, he was not good because he was a dreamer, and schools in general, like kind of are irritated by dreamers. But this dreamer left his mark. So Robert Maillard was a Swiss civil engineer who revolutionized the use of structural reinforced concrete with such designs as the three-hinged arch and the deck-stiffened arch for bridges, and the beamless floor slab and mushroom ceiling for industrial buildings. He's, sorry for, I don't know if I read it well, Sargina, Tobel, and Schwanbach bridges changed the aesthetics and engineering of bridge construction dramatically and influenced decades of architects and engineers after him. In 1991, this bridge was declared an International Historic Civil Engineering Landmark by the American Society of Civil Engineers. Maillard did not excel in academic theories, but understood the necessity to make assumptions and visualize when analyzing a structure. A traditional method prior to the 1900s was to use shapes that could be analyzed easily using mathematics. This overuse of mathematics annoyed Maillard, as he greatly preferred to stand back and use common sense to predict full-scale performance. Also, as he rarely tested his bridges prior to construction, only upon completion would he verify the bridge was adequate. He often tested his bridges by crossing them himself. This attitude towards bridge design and construction was what provided him with his innovative designs. So what do we learn from this? That he used mathematics. Of course, he was an engineer, but he trusted even more intuition and common sense. And Einstein did the same thing, and his advice about great education, because they were human first, and I would say at bottom poets. And this is what differentiates between an architect and a great architect. The second one is a poet, and is the same with an engineer, and is the same with a poet himself. A poet who is not a poet is not a poet, no? And also I would add humbly, the one who brooms a floor. This is the man. Hello, Mr. Maillard. Happy birthday to you, truly, from our hearts. We wish you happy birthday. A dreamer, of course, but what would life be without these dreamers? It would be irrelevant. It would be actually an annoyance, because you know very well how tough life can be. Thanks to these dreamers, we can smile just as he smiles here. And towards the end of his life, he died at 68. And look at him here. Would you say that this man is not a poet? I mean, he could have been very well part of the Surrealist group in Paris. He's a man who knows. He smiles because he arrived at awareness. I don't know about that strange thing on his head, but again, even that is the choice of a poet. I like him. I love him. Okay, some drawings. Well, an engineer's drawings, but they are beautiful. Look at these numbers. Look at my God, you would say, Jesus, what's going on here? But that's how he arrived at the poetry of his constructions. It's both necessity and desire. And that's what differentiates a prosaic work from a great work. A great work also has desire, not just necessity. Anyway, I understand nothing about this. I was terrible in my studies of structures, but I admire good structures, and I have a I don't know, some kind of I have how to say, there is an expression now about I forgot about an educated consumer. Yes, I'm not an educated consumer in the field of structures at all, but my eye tells me that there is truth here, and there is beauty, and there is calculation, and there is also the beyond. Now we go to this bridge. He built several bridges, very, very interesting, all of them, and all in good measure works of art. Davanaza Bridge. This is the drawing. What is a bridge? In essence, is to connect one side of the river or the abyss, how to call it, with the other. I remember once I was in a jury for a competition in New York, a strange competition to unite two islands that separate in between Alaska and the eastern side of what was Soviet Union. There are two islands, the Diomede Islands. Very interesting, these two islands. You can see one island from the other island, but on one island it is Tuesday, and on the other island it is Monday. There is a difference of one day between the two, and you can see them. It's like you are on one side of the street, and on one side of the street is Monday, on the other side of the street is Tuesday. So
one island you can see tomorrow.
Pardon?
From one of these islands you can see tomorrow.
Yes, yes. Anyway, so someone submitted a work, an artist from Greece, who said, in order to build a bridge well, you have to first cross it and then build it. And it's a metaphysical crossing there, of course, but I think she was right. If you cross the bridge in your mind before you cross it with your legs, you have a chance to build it properly. And again, this is older than 100 years, this bridge. But look at this. Look at the shape. I mean, this is a building. It's a building. This bridge, if it was built today, you say, sure, we are in the 21st century. Except that he built it 100 years ago. And it was based on calculations, but it was also based on desire. And on the eye, you saw the man. He was a surrealist, a poet, a sculptor, an home of vision, but also concerned with beauty, very much so. And I believe when such a work is done, the leaves, the bushes, the trees, the flowers are happy too. I truly believe nature is happy when the work of man achieves levels of excellence, probably close to the level of its own or her own levels of excellence. If I am to make nature as being feminine, nice bridge. And but bridges, I also I feel tempted to repeat something that I kind of say not often, but from time to time. The oldest definition of art that I found, and I don't usually like definitions, but this one is intriguing. Art equals bridge equals God in Sanskrit or even a Proto-Indo-European language. So initially, art meant bridge and through extension, God. And so, here we are dealing with a bridge that tries to connect the two sides of a river. But, I cannot forget or neglect what the meaning, the original meaning of the word art was. Concrete, just concrete here. Now, as I said, the concrete is unfortunately a polluting material. Yeah, but it is a material that you saw Felix Candela worked with quite well. And it's kind of interesting today that, fate in a way decided to have the same day when a great engineer was born, and on that very day, a great gardener died. Because if you talk about engineering and gardening, in a way you talk about two extremes now, and I like the interplay between them. Another bridge, sorry about the resolution of this picture, as elegant as the previous ones. Um, what can we say? I mean, I don't know if these things were there here from the beginning. Maybe yes, maybe not. And this is not one of his greatest bridges, but still this curvature has nobility.
Mm.
Although I did notice a problem is in some of his bridges.
Picks up the gentle hills in the background and the curvature.
Pardon?
It seems to relate to the gentle curvature of the hills in the background, in a way.
Yes, yes, it does.
May I say one thing fast? I hesitate to interrupt, but
Please.
one of the great American poems is called The Bridge by Hart Crane. And the bridge in question is the Brooklyn Bridge, which is the great suspension bridge across the East River by the Roeblings, father and son. And at the end of the opening address to the bridge, he asks the bridge to lend a myth to God. So he was thinking the way you're thinking.
Well, thank you. Yes, it is a great bridge, the one you mentioned, and so a great poet. So this is I'm very happy, Paul, that you had this intervention, because yes, the so-called different disciplines meet. The engineer with the poet, with the builder, they meet, and they should meet. When they are the best, they do meet. So specialization is necessary perhaps, but is not sufficient. Le Corbusier has a drawing, like two hands that are together, the hand of the engineer and the hand of the architect. I truly think Le Corbusier had a lot of respect for engineers, and he understood that without them, the buildings would not easily come into being at all. Another bridge, this one has some historicist, a little bit details, but it is probably older. Let's not forget this gentleman was born 150 years ago almost. So, it was, he was active already at the end of the 19th century. It's also, this is an urban, maybe that's why also it is like this. It is an urban bridge. Most of his bridges are actually in natural settings. So maybe he tried here to connect, I don't know, a little bit with some architectures around the bridge is possible. Now this bridge is a very important one, and I try to postpone a little bit arriving at it, and I only show the trees at first, but it's very elegant, And it's truly, you would say, no, this bridge was not built by a human being. It was built by God Himself, who exercised His skill at engineering and architecture. It's perfect, and this bridge was and is considered very, very highly. It's stable, it's functioning very well, but it's also very, very elegant, and it arrived at that simplicity, at that essence that, for example, I mentioned Brâncuș, he was searching for in his sculptures. No more, no less. You cannot add, you cannot subtract. It is a summum in the best sense of the word. And it's truly a very, very fine bridge by Robert Maillard. Too bad I'm not an engineer and I don't have the necessary knowledge to explain it or to describe it in adequate terms. But if you are interested, you can arrive at it very easily on the web. Just type in Robert Maillard and this bridge will show up immediately. This particular bridge, but it's not the only one, of course. This is another one that is famous, and unfortunately I have difficulties. I don't even attempt to read the first word, although maybe it's not so difficult.
Schwandbach.
Schwandbach.
It's German. I see from the inscriptions on his drawings. In Switzerland, it could also be French, but German is his language. Yeah.
So W in
this
German.
Schwandbach.
Yes, Schwandbach.
Schwandbach, Brücke. Yeah.
Right. So it's not so difficult. My inferiority complex was.
I just happen to know some German, is all.
Thank you.
Languages I did. Yeah.
How do you Brücke? No, Brücke in German, the bridge.
Yeah, bridge in German is Brücke.
Yes.
BRU with an umlaut. CA.
Yeah, there was even a great art movement at the beginning of the 20th century.
The city of Innsbruck was originally, the bridge by the Inn.
So, the drawing maybe doesn't look so spectacular, but what is spectacular is that it's curved. I mean, in plan, it's curved. And you see it here. It's a fine piece of engineering, and it could look quite dramatic from certain angles. Here it is during construction. Even during construction, it looks impressive. I mean, I like the scaffolding. Let's not forget, this is Switzerland, so they do things very well and methodically, as you can see.
And it's so high in the air. I mean, a lot of empty space underneath it.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know exactly why he
maybe the road was at the level where the bridge is, but there's this deep valley,
right,
between,
it's possible.
Yes. They have to be connected, but it's quite dramatic when you look at it. I mean, it's like this thing is far, far above the ground below it.
These pictures, during construction, I see that as some kind of an inspector, or maybe just the engineer himself. I don't know. Maybe the engineer is the one whose face is not seen. But again, we look at these things that are miraculous almost, and they are built by human beings, with our limited intelligence, with our limited means. And because of imagination and because of knowledge and because of desire, we are able to build these things. I mean, what a better encouragement to aspire, just as Robert Maillard did. Another Brücke bridge, Bolbach bridge, smaller, less dramatic one. I noticed there were a problem, and I don't know if this was conditioned by I don't know, the specificities of the place. you see between this and this, there is some kind of a schism. There is some kind of a rift. It's like there are this is very abruptly. I wonder if he couldn't. I mean, the bridge is done very well, but then it ends abruptly, and then something else happens. It's as if there is no joining here. That maybe I don't know. I don't know exactly why this happened, but it seems that the bridge is not connecting further somehow with what is happening beyond its limits. I don't know if I explained very well, but I noticed this in a few photographs. This in no way should be interpreted as some kind of criticism. I just don't understand very well, because the level of excellence he achieved in these bridges is very, very high. Like even here, it's what can I say? I wish I could have done such a bridge.
Hmm.
I mean, he was a sculptor too. I mean, to imagine and to build and to calculate, to measure, to make it happen, and at the same time to keep the lines so pure, and they are pure. Um, it's not a little thing. I mean, yes, the artist can draw it, yeah, but from here to build it and to calculate as he did, this is quite something. Anyway, another Brücke. This one a little bit different. Maybe the principles, the static principles are the same, but the form is a little bit different. Maybe here the base is a little bit massive. I don't know. I mean, but this is also almost 100 years old. So, and the modernity of the design is still very obvious. I mean, this was built before the Second World War. I wonder what Hitler would have thought of these bridges. Traubach Bridge. This one also is splendid. I mean, look at this. It's almost a classical architecture, but it's very modern. It's a very fine bridge.
Century Rome.
Yes.
Yeah.
Now, this is a bridge that is longer, and it has this, this is above the soil. But look at these legs, and you are going to see also a few structural works done by him, not bridges. And you see how creative he was, and how at times even spectacular in his handling of structure. Look here, this is curved a little bit, so these legs, they surprise the eye, and also it's very possible they are very logical in terms of their calculations and the efforts that they try to honor. It's very elegant, and it's simple and complex at the same time. It's almost alive somehow here, and it's just necessary work. Nothing is superfluous here, and at the same time it's very, very elegant. Now, of course, we see some graffitis here. What can we do?
Tagger's gonna tag. Say in American street talk.
Another bridge. This one a little bit. I think one of the earliest. Yeah. One of the earliest.
Yeah. By the way, the word Bach in German just means a brook or a small river. That's why there's Bach in so many of these names.
Yes. Thank you. Interesting coincidence in a way with the name of the composer. If we
Yeah,
are,
yeah. If he were English, his name would have been Brooke, John Brooke.
yes. So Bach in English would be translated into brook.
Brook, or a stream, a river, a small river, a large river is a Fluss, like the Rhine or the Mississippi, but a smaller river is a Bach.
Yes. Thank you very much, Paul. Please be kind and join
Happen
us
to
every
know it,
day.
so might as well offer it. Yeah.
We can learn a lot from you. Thank you. So we still have to arrive at the gardener, so I rush a little bit. Other structures by this brilliant engineer. This is Pabellon Cement Halle. It's a
What a perfect name for an engineer, cement hall.
yeah, this is it. I didn't find too many pictures of it. They are not of the best quality, but we see him competing here with Felix Candela. Very, very, very thin concrete shell is almost unbelievable. I mean, look at it. It almost has no thickness. Truly amazing. Now, a music pavilion. He built this. This is a little bit different from the other works, but as you can see, Robert Maillard also, challenged himself with other kinds of structures, and it's fine. It's functional. It's interesting aesthetically. It's a fine piece, I think.
Mhm.
Different from you almost wouldn't expect it from someone who built those bridges, but it shows that he was able to handle various programs without renouncing his aesthetical concerns. So this is a music pavilion, also in concrete, and now we arrive at an interesting work where he eliminated the horizontal structural parts, the beams. I always have a trouble, I have to confess, and I am almost embarrassed by it, because I always, it's like in the case of kitchen and chicken, I always have to stop and think, because I could very well confound the two. And it's the same with beams and beams. And sometimes I say, beam instead of beam, and I do have a problem. So anyway, in this case, I think it's about beams, no, not beams. But look at this column. It's actually, so there is no beam here. It's just the slab. And then the transition from the slab to the column, or from the column to the slab, and he is the inventor of this thing, and it is interesting, and I'm sure it is both logical, it's functional, but very interesting so-called solution. He eliminated the beams completely. And you see, it's no hanged ceiling here, nothing. You just see the structure and its purity. Very elegant. And it doesn't matter at what floor. You see a section, there are several floors. There is even some kind of an office. Yeah, it's a good work. Here is the section. And you see how, logically in a way, the columns at the bottom are thicker and they go thinner and thinner, and there are no beams, eliminated.
Can I?
For architects and engineers in general, it is inconceivable to have, columns without beams. But look, it's possible. He did it. He eliminated them.
Yeah, what is very interesting about this is that the system that he uses, it's a thick slab, and basically when you do this, you need to make a prismatic piece at the end of the column in order to distribute the forces. And in my opinion, it's very interesting how how he made a connection between the column and the thick slab in order to have logical at the structural level.
Yes, you need that intermediate part, between the column and the slab. But even the Greeks, when they used their orders, they had beams. Here he eliminated the beams completely, and yeah, he knew how to do it. I mean, maybe an architect could have this idea about how to actually do it physically. You need to have the engineer's knowledge, and he had it. But this doesn't need any longer any kind of beautification or additional. It's fine as it is. The structure became aesthetically pleasing because the engineer had also an eye, so to speak, and desire, I would say. And what I like is there is no makeup here. There are no necessary gestures of hiding anything or embellishing anything. It's simply the robust truth in a way. It's just structure. It's a very fine work. Now here also this is a spectacular work. Of course there are many engineering works that are interesting, but look at this. You wouldn't expect this. I mean, I am looking at it with a very innocent and ignorant eye. But if I had to make a sketch myself of maybe something like this, I wouldn't expect here to curve inwardly a little bit exactly at the center. It surprises me. And I'm sure he arrived at it based on very rigorous calculations. And inside, there is this web of structural elements that are very interesting. I mean, look at the columns, how they curve and they become beams. In this case, there are some kind of beams there, nervures, the nervatures, how to call them, of the structure. I think it's very, and look at this. Underneath, we have the prose of human life, but above, I mean, the structure is very noble. It has nobility. It has force. It has beauty. It's cultural. It is simple. It is complex, and it doesn't really matter whatever happens underneath. Probably this space is used for very prosaic matters, but the above shows clearly creativity, and this creativity makes life worth living. Otherwise, if life is reduced just to this, nah. And look at this. It's fine. It's a very fine work, and it's also very logical, I imagine. It was done by an engineer, not by a capricious, drunk poet or artist. No, this is by an engineer who probably drank buttermilk, not alcohol. And yet, it is poetical. It is crazed a little bit. It's very fine. I like it. And this is, could it be concrete? I mean, it looks like concrete, but you would expect this kind of thing to be done with steel or with wood. I don't know. It's almost miraculous for me, being that I'm ignorant in this field.
May I ask a quick question?
Please.
I unfortunately missed your discussion of Boulez, but the notorious thing about Boulez is he designed these gigantic things that couldn't be built. Did you talk about the relationship of engineering to imagination when you did Boulez? And very briefly, if so, what would you say about it?
Well, maybe we should dedicate a gathering here on Zoom exactly to this subject, engineering and imagination. Would you like to call?
Drawings are fabulous, but nobody built them most of the time.
Right. But that's also because the man well, he was even accused of being megalomaniacal. I don't know. I thought, I mean, he was a visionary architect who had impossible dreams. Maybe not so impossible, but in terms of aspiration, they were indeed beyond certain limits. I think they could have been built and they could be built. When I talked about when I talked about Boule, I showed two examples: a cultural center in Mexico, actually in Tijuana, kind of inspired by the cenotaph for Newton, and a library in China built by MVRDV, also inspired by both his Bibliothèque du Roi and the cenotaph for Newton. I could make that presentation again one day. Paula, I have to say, the birthday of Boule will be later this month, I think, or at the beginning of March. So I made a presentation on him on the day when he died, but because he was also born before he died, I will also make one on his birthday. So it will be my pleasure to invite you. So, but look, I really like this structure. You know, in its simplicity, it's architecture. That's what it is. This is a book. This is a book published on him, Robert Maillard, builder, designer, and artist. Interestingly, you know, the word engineer does not show up. He was an engineer who built, who designed, and who was also an artist. Okay, and now we go to two gardeners. I said I complicate my matters a little bit, but I do it with pleasure. So today, Lancelot Brown, the primordial British gardener, died. But because I want to compare, just as we did in the case of the engineers, one Spanish engineer and one Swiss engineer, I thought, because I had this presentation, to also show André Le Notre, the great French gardener or landscape architect, and then Lancelot Brown, the great British gardener or landscape architect. So I begin with André Le Notre, whom I admire greatly. I actually admire him more than I admire the architects from his time. He had a long life, and he was very, very appreciated. And of course, he was the so-called gardener of Les Tuileries, Versailles. I think at Versailles, the gardens are by far superior to the building. This was the man, I mean, this was a man who was acknowledged as being great and was commissioned by Louis Le Soleil, Louis the Sun King, accordingly. And he worked also on some buildings, but he was essentially a gardener, but the king's gardener, a landscape architect. This is, I mean, you know, in the 17th century, when Le Notre lived, you see, he was born in the 1613 and died in 1700. So he lived in the 17th century, and gardening was considered an important matter, a sophisticated matter. But so it was in England the next century. So they had landscape designers of great capacity and great accomplishments, like, for example, Brown. He designed more than 170 parks and gardens. This is not something to ignore. Anyway, André Le Notre. I mean, you can have a list. You can study his work. He was truly one of the greatest. I love André Le Notre. I even launched on a competition, a house, and then in parentheses, or a garden for André Le Notre. When the way, I don't know, I think 400 years since his birth, yes. Vaux-le-Vicomte. You know, these gardens are, of course, they are not for proletarians, they are for the elite. What can you do? I'm not I'm not at all ignoring the injustices of the world, and they irritate me. But in a way, I mean, when you create beauty, yes, you create it for a king or for a high, personage, a high person, someone of the elite of the structure, so the social political structure. Yes, in immediacy, you create it for him or her, but in a larger sense, it is for everybody, and not just for everybody within that time, but also beyond that time. And here we are, almost 400 years later, talking about the gardens of André Le Notre, who built for the very few. Versailles. I mean, this is a cosmos. This is not a garden. This is a cosmos. It's not a park. It's not a garden. It's a cosmos. Even the drawing, you look at it with its complexities, with its diagonals, there are constellations here. It's almost like a projection of God's kingdom on earth, interpreted by a so-called garden. Of course, it was done for a king, but look at what's going on here. It's unbelievable. I have been in this park. I never entered the palace. I don't like crystals. I don't like the glamour of the kings. But the park, I would gladly die in that park, and I would gladly spend. We'll come back to it more in detail. Now I just show a chronology of the works. Chantilly, again, vastness of space, because this man, just like the two previous engineers, had desire in him. Of course, he served, his beneficiaries, his clients, but was more to it. I think the man, meaning André Le Notre, was having a dialogue with the infinite. This is what he used the commissions as pretext to serve his longing for the infinite. Gardens of Chateau d'Issy, yes, there was plenty of space, of course, and so he was able to express his desire for the infinite. I think this was destroyed or something. This is just a ruin, part of the park, but these ruins are themselves moving for the nostalgic person. What can I do? I have romantic inclinations. I love ruins, and so I get stirred up. But this is part of the estate. And here is an old picture. I don't know. Certainly, it was not photographed in 1635. There was no photography at that time. But the chateau, the castle, was built then. In the early part of the 17th century. This is interesting that somehow gardens today are not, they either became pathetically private, and certainly we don't have the capacity even to envision such cosmic scapes, or how to call them. But I think maybe we should come back to it, because it's really about nature and about the dialogue with nature, and beyond nature. I hate to become too rhetorical now, but I cannot easily avoid the word cosmic. These are just images trying to approximate what this park was about. I don't know if it still exists in the way that he envisioned it. But we see the arabesque, the ornaments, these projections on earth of imaginative designs. But these drawings are contemporary, are digital drawings. His plans are here. Gardens of Chateau de Chambonat, water, trees, grass, large vistas. It's all André Le Notre, who tried to bring order into nature by mediating between the richness of nature and strictness in a way of authority, be it a king or whatever, and other maybe some kind of restrictions having to do, I think, with centrality, the centrality of power. Gardens of Chateau de Bercy. It seems as if there were several kings in France at that time, and not just one, because some of these structures and some of these gardens were built for nobility, for noblemen who were not the king. But it seems the king allowed for a variety of, almost megalomaniacal tendencies, and not just his own. Gardens of Chateau de Chantilly. This is a great castle in France, and look at the landscape. I truly believe today, and actually I know the school, the architecture school in Cincinnati has a department or a faculty of horticulture. I do believe we need gardeners, we need landscape architects. It's almost vital, it's necessary to come back to nature with as much knowledge and inspiration as possible. And I think it could be very, very rewarding now to make compositions, to work with trees, with grass, with plants, with flowers, with bushes. And yes, we have plenty of buildings in the world. I think we need more gardens, and not only vertical gardens or vertical forests, as is the fashion now, to climb the elevations, the facades of great tall buildings with green. Now, I think we need a return. I have seen plans for Manhattan where Broadway is transformed into a linear long park. Broadway, a major way in Manhattan. And so, yeah, it's vital to invite nature back into our lives as much as possible. Gardens of Chateau de Fontainebleau. Here I have been. It's a very special place because, well, of course, there is a lot of sky, and yes, we think of living under the sky, to use the terms of the expression of Heidegger. It's a different relationship with the world. You don't have to be a king. You are a tourist. You go there, but there is a lot of tranquility. And I don't know. It's difficult to be neurotical in such a space. Of course, here also the building is significant, but I'm talking about the gardens that will come back to it, I think, later on. Gardens of Chateau de Sceaux, another major, garden designed by André Le Notre, and he is indeed Le Notre, meaning ours. And I think any artist and any poet and anything, engineer, who offers himself, herself to the world, should be called Le Notre, ours. Because right. I do believe Le fait c'est moi becomes Le fait c'est nous. This is what the wise men of the world advocated, that you go beyond our little ego and you open up to the world and you become Le Notre. So his name just happened to be Le Notre, but essentially I think Maillard could have been called also Le Notre, or Felix Candela, and many others. Look at these trees. They are the cubical aestheticization of the trees that is typical of the gardening, French gardening, would make one wonder, because the French, we think of them as being romantic, tumultuous, tempestuous, Latins, but look how they treat the trees. This kind of cosmetic surgery, this kind of treatment is domesticating the trees could perplex one.
The notion of the French as romantic comes a little later with Rousseau, and of course with the Revolution. but they're also associated with the rationalism of Descartes. And, the mediation of nature by geometry is very prominent in this French gardening style. And the English garden was defined in contrast to it as less geometrical, more an art that concealed art and approximated nature. So,
Exactly.
an historical question here.
No, exactly. And we are going to see this, that Mr. Brown, yes, the art of gardening in England or Great Britain is, more, in a way, if I am to express myself in this way, more Latin than the one of France. And you are right, Descartes was French. Of course, there is this almost contradiction within the French spirit. That's why some people think that the French are kind of halfway between the Italians and the Germans.
Not just geographically.
Right. So Palais des Tuileries in Paris, the gardens, another great work. What can we say? I mean, there is greatness in the world, and there is, I think, greatness everywhere in various forms. Here we see across the Seine, Musée d'Orsay, and Louvre is here, and a little bit on the left is Ain Pays Glass Pyramid, and then in the courtyard, more to the left is that structure for the Islamic art that Mario Bellini built. And I think if we are open and we can absorb these collaborations, you have, a French gardener, you have an Italian architect. Here also was Aulenti was the designer who transformed the railway station d'Orsay into a great museum.
That's a marvelous museum, isn't it?
Yes, it is. And you go a little bit to the right, and it's Place de la Concorde, and there is l'Assemblée Nationale. And, we have nature and we have culture. And I do believe that at this time, we have this crisis, this problem. Now the pandemic is forcing us to go inwardly a little bit, and to paradoxically, we have a chance to connect now in ways in which we didn't connect when there was no pandemic. And I do think that now it's a time to, in a way, to take revenge on suffering, on problems, on tragedies, on limitations through culture. Through culture, we can recharge ourselves, our imaginations through examples that come from the past and from the present. And we can transform the negative into a positive, I think. Jardin des Tuileries, André Le Notre, lots of people, maybe again, it will be possible to travel, and it moves me, the human genius, yes, we can be beasts. I mentioned Hitler not too long ago. Yes, human beings can do also terrible things, but we can also do beautiful things. And it's really up to us if we what we choose. And yeah, it is André Le Notre, but he was not alone. Here you had sculptors and artists and workers who anonymously they all contributed. This was a collective work, just like the work for the Gothic Cathedral, and just like the work for so many other parts. If we can understand that we are actually not alone. Gardens of Chateau de Saint-Cloud, we get a feeling about what André Le Notre was about. Although he used geometry, sometimes strict geometries, you can tell that what he aspired towards was not very different from what Lancelot Brown aspired towards, or Maillard or Felix Candela. They aspire towards the infinite, towards the beyond, taming nature. Well, taming nature, Gardens of Chateau de Saint-Germain-en-Laye. Is it truly? I mean, it is and it isn't, because on one hand, nature, without the participation of André Le Notre, I don't think it would have aspired itself towards returning to its master, meaning God or the infinite or the absolute. You can use any word. Without the gardener or the architect or the engineer or the composer or the poet or the writer or the musician, uh, somehow the splendor of nature is not, I know I'm saying something maybe controversial now, but somehow I have a feeling that nature by itself doesn't achieve its highest potential in the absence of man. But unfortunately, also in the presence of man, it could achieve its lowest. So we have to be careful. But all in all, I think there is, I mean, I think the age of Anthropocene is very, very questionable now. But on the other hand, I don't know. I think that human being, I'm beginning to, I'm turning against myself, but I have a feeling that we need people like him and like them, those that I talked about today and some other days. Okay, look at this, you know, look at that, look at that geometry of the trees, which is not dead. And look at the shadow, look at the shadow of this, you know, geometrized bush. And I don't know, there are splendid things here, and the palace in the background, and the sky, and I don't know.
What always strikes me, though, is the prominence of geometry, but the things that are composing the geometrical figure are all alive.
Yes, because they
So
are
it's
trees.
animated geometry.
A very good observation, Paul, because I think even a cube, if it is animated from within by you know, so-called fragments that are alive, that are dynamic, even a cube could be alive. So you are right. You are perfectly.
Me, I prefer the English style. It's true, but these are magnificent things if you grant them their premise.
They are. They are in a very different way than the British landscape. They are. Gardens of Vaux-le-Vicomte, one of the most important gardens or parks that he designed. And there are here sophisticated things. I don't know them very well. I read about them, but I'm not really an expert. But he also, in section, he plays with various levels. Certain things are hidden from a certain point of view, and then they become discoverable or you know, obvious from another angle. And so he's playing a little bit hide and seek with a human eye and with a human imagination. Even here, from this point, you almost see a human face here, you know, like two eyes.
Eyes and a mouth, yeah.
Yeah, and I don't know if he did it intentionally, but in his attempt to create you know, a planning that is alive and is not dead and is not static, he used various ways of designing, and I don't know. I feel that this was a very sensitive man and a complex man who understood how to collaborate with nature and also to create. I mean, this is a rug. No, it's. I imagine it's not easy to take care of something like this, in as much as it's not easy to take care of the gardens of Lancelot Brown, who is actually known as Capability Brown, because he used to tell his clients when he saw a certain estate that it has the capability to become a great estate or a great garden. So his name remained. He's generally known as Capability Brown. We'll arrive at him.
That's
after.
how I knew of him. Yeah, now I realize who it is. Yeah.
His first name was Lancelot. Anyway, but André Le Notre lived. When André Le Notre died, Lancelot Brown, or Capability Brown. Sounds a little strange, Capability Brown, but that's how he is actually known, was born. So André Le Notre came before Capability Brown. And no, the glory of the French spirit is all here. What can we say? It must have been a great pleasure for André Le Notre to do these works.
Mm.
He was lucky, of course, because he had clients who had the means to make this possible. I mean, truly, he was almost the designer of God. I mean, he worked with the earth, but very large areas. I mean, this is not a little urban park; it's huge, and yeah, can you imagine how many people were necessary to just to take care of this? Because you cannot leave it like this, nature would not take it for too long, and so
if the staff went on strike for 2 weeks, this would be a mess.
right. Anyway, the castle is also nice, le chateau, and everything is. I mean, I had been at Fontainebleau, I had been at Versailles, and the Tuileries, but just to take a walk through is so peaceful, I don't know, you feel like fear disappears, you feel integrated somehow into the world. Here you see a section. Sorry, the picture is not very fine, but I think you can still see here that he played with various heights, altitudes of
their elevations, yeah.
And because of it, I mean, it was intentional. This was not. It was created in order to achieve certain effects. He was a very sensitive and sophisticated designer.
So he must have calculated the sight lines that you could get from various elevations, what you would see from above or below.
I mean, this requires study in itself for a presentation just about this work. It's some kind of if I can call it so, an outdoor horizontal cathedral. Alexandra Nobel, I don't know why.
An age of enlightenment.
Yes.
Yeah.
But then also all kinds of pagan gods that naturally are connected with nature, with gardens, with parks. So André Le Notre again. Look at the plan. It's a fine graphic work by itself. Just the plan. Gardens of Versailles. We arrive more in detail now at looking at these famous gardens. These famous gardens. They are famous for various reasons. Also, the sculptures, the statues are magnificent, especially when they throw water in the air. I hope I have images with that. Now, this population was there before the pandemic, but let's hope the pandemic will be controlled, and then we can travel again. There are so many parts here to be discovered. It's true. It's a huge estate. It's Versailles. 2 years ago, I went with students from here to Versailles, to Paris, but we also went to Versailles, and it was impossible to. I mean, there were thousands and thousands and thousands of people and buses, and it was like God, so many people. This is one of the main touristic targets, And in as much as I love democracy, I wish there were fewer people. We had to leave. It was impossible to. But we look here at the pictures, and there is no one. And in this sense, virtuality is not bad.
I'm going to duck out for a minute. I don't want to miss Brown when you get to him, so I'll be back in a minute.
Okay, sure. Yeah, we have a few more images with André Notre. So again, we had an encounter with two important engineers, and now with an important gardener, and then we'll end the presentation today with a second important gardener, this time British. So we saw Felix Candela, the Spanish engineer who worked in Mexico, and then we saw Robert Maillard, the Swiss engineer, and now we look at the works of André Le Notre, the great gardener of Louis Le Soleil, or Louis the Sun King, and we'll end with Capability Brown, with Lancelot Capability Brown, the gardener, the father of British gardener, or the most important designer of gardens in Great Britain, as he is known. Although there are some people I read who are also questioning him a little bit, but this is true with anything, you know. There are always pros and contras. There are always forces that have a different opinion or whatever. Anyway, let's continue with Versailles. This was indeed for the kings, or for the gods on earth, for the king himself, and he was quite a king. That's why he was called Louis Le Soleil, or Louis the Sun King. I mean, what could be greater than the sun, no? And the Sun King was his emissary, in a way, on earth.
The fall colors.
Right. So, but there are very different parts of Versailles. You know, some are very elaborate with labyrinths, with ornaments, with arabesques. Others have a different kind of aesthetic. It's a very interesting park and very complex. So it is a symphonic work, and he benefited of great sculptors and so on. I mean, look at this. You know, it truly this goes to God Himself. You know, it goes to the infinite. It goes forever, and yeah, it was for the king. I love these diagonals. I always love diagonals, and there are plenty of diagonals here, although the general effect is one of great equilibrium, of balance, of harmony. I mean, this is an imago mundi, really. It's an imago mundi. It's an image of the world, maybe for God to enjoy and contemplate. And now, some more detailed pictures of details of the garden, with the green and the whiteness of the statues, and nature and culture. It doesn't matter it's a fog or not. It's still it's mysterious and clear at the same time. It's truly a perfect gathering, meeting between nature and culture. And that they complement each other generously, perfectly almost. And water is adding to the harmony through its own dynamics. I love the gardens of Versailles. But as I said, although I visited it 3 times, but I never entered the palace. Maybe I made a mistake. I have seen pictures, and there are splendid things there, but maybe I would have been envious of it. I don't know. This is an inspired commentary on life itself. You know, it's the human drama, the one that consumes us all, and it is transcended into beauty. It became art. Um, I don't know. I mean, the Latins say ars longa vita brevis. Levi-Sud said no, it's the other way around. Ars brevis vita longa, but maybe then we go back, ars longa vita brevis. The interplay between art and life is magnificent. Sometimes it's painful. They need each other. I'm thinking of Pushkin, the great Russian poet, who in Onegin, he described the case of a poet who dies in a duel because being jealous, he provoked, I don't know who flirted with his wife or with his girlfriend, and he provokes him to a duel, and he dies in the duel. And 2 years later, the very same thing happened to Pushkin. I mean, I wonder, didn't Pushkin think that his destiny would be similar to the one that Onegin had? In this case, art preceded life. He wrote himself about a jealous poet who dies in a duel because he provoked to a duel the wrong person. And exactly the same thing happened to him 2 years later. So I don't know, it's so strange. It's hard for me to believe that a man of his intelligence didn't think for a second that what he anticipated, or not anticipated, what he described in Onegin would happen to him. So the relationship, some people did think that it's not art that copies life, but life that copies art. And in the case, that case that I mentioned with Pushkin, this was the case. Life copied art. Um, you know, it is an interplay between the two. It's obvious, and it's almost as if one needs the other. Life needs art, art needs life. They need each other. You can't have art without life, and perhaps you can't have life without art. Okay, so here we move forward. Come on, Andre Le Notre. We have to arrive at Lancelot Brown, Capability Brown. Here you see interesting scenes of natural aggression. You already see here the suffering, you know, of the animal that is, defeated by the stronger animal. And here you see now even more the cruelty of nature. You know, this is supposed to emanate water. And yes, there is aggressivity, there is cruelty. It is part of nature, and it is part of life, unfortunately. The big fish eats the small fish. The dog, you know, kills the deer, and yet in, you know, I don't know. I mean, I'm a little bit confused, because did truly life need so much cruelty? Why so much suffering? Look at the face of this poor animal who dies dramatically because he's killed by a stronger animal. And this also happens between human beings, unfortunately. So strange combination here between images of cruelty and also grace, meaning beauty. Just like in the Gothic cathedral, those of the 12th century or so in Europe, which didn't, banish scenes of the apocalypse or hell. No, they are there, present with an equal power of persuasions with the other scenes. We don't do this today, you know. We are kind of, but this is a subject in itself, because maybe our life has so many elements of cruelty and aggressivity that we don't need it also, although there is a lot of aggressiveness in art, no doubt, in contemporary art or modern art.
Perhaps it's about different conceptions of natural order. Darwin hasn't happened yet, but already in Hobbes, the state of nature is described as the war of each against all. So you could say that Versailles is a very beautiful lie about nature that edits all of that out. And Brown is letting it back in, but it's part of the conception of natural order, even at that time.
Yes, I think we should talk more about these issues, and maybe we can initiate a gathering to talk about some of these issues specifically. I mean, trees are trees. What can we do? What can we do? I love trees. That's the truth. And what would we do without them, really? I remember when I visited Villa Adriana in Tivoli near Rome, and I was going to, as a tourist, going to see the building. But on my way towards the building, I came across an orchard of olive trees, and I just couldn't leave them. For 2 hours, I filmed olive trees. I had a feeling that those olive trees were seeing through me, that they were wise. I didn't know at that time that olive trees are some of the oldest trees on earth, that they live very, very long lives. But I remember those contorted olive trees being so able to create emotion in me. I really had a feeling that they were seeing through me, that they were knowing me better than I knew myself. I remember clearly what I felt, and I photographed them and I filmed them for about 2 hours, more than the time spent in the proximity of the ruins of Villa Adriana from Tivoli. Anyway, nature is a continuous, maybe, I mean, not maybe, Frank Lloyd Wright was correct. Study nature. It will never let you down. There is the great inspiration, truly. But very rarely we do that today because, we are so estranged in a way from nature. Trees in Versailles. These are photographs by this photographer, Laurie Victor Kay. They are processed in a certain way, but they are interesting. So I thought of ending the presentation on Andre Le Notre with her photographs. In essence, what do we see here? We see 2 rows of trees meeting at the top, like bridging between each other, between themselves. It's some kind of courtship now between the two sides of the road or the path, or the 2 rows of trees, avenue of trees, an avenue of trees. I kind of like the wording. They are like human beings in a way. These trees, they something about them. Also at Versailles. Okay, and now we arrive at the last presentation today on Capability Brown, the great landscape designer of Great Britain. And I wish I had, my presentation is not as ample as it could have been, as should have been. But it's a beginning, an introduction to his work. Myself, I recognize, I learned about him just a few days ago. To my shame, I didn't know of him, and now I know a little bit, and I hope I will know more. Lancelot Brown, also known as being Capability, he's actually known as Capability Brown, and here it will be explained. Lancelot Brown, he was born in 1715, but baptized in 1716, but he died on the 6th of February. 1783. More commonly known as Capability Brown, was an English landscape architect. He's remembered as the last of the great English 18th century artists to be accorded his due, and England's greatest gardener. Beautiful. I mean, to be a gardener is already great, but to be the greatest gardener of such a country as England is not a little thing at all. He designed over 170 parks, many of which survive. Can you imagine? I mean, it's, 250 years old, the parks. He was nicknamed Capability because he would tell his clients that their property had capability for improvement. His influence was so great that the contributions to the English garden made by his predecessors, Charles Bridgman and William Kent, are often overlooked. Even Kent's champion, Horace Walpole, allowed that Kent was succeeded by a very able master. A very nice way to put it, succeeded by a very able master. Very nice. This was the man. Yeah, I do think we need more gardeners in the world and more landscape architects, if we are to call them so. People who work with nature. And not necessarily to impose, no, not at all, to impose their will on nature. I actually am tempted to think that maybe for a while we need wild nature, to allow nature to manifest herself with all the capriciousness that it wants for a while, and then maybe we'll tame her a little bit here and there through the works of people, inspired people like Capability Brown. Some drawings, unfortunately, it was hard to find. I found some images of his original drawings, 250 years old or so. And I do think that this garden design is very interesting and rewarding. You don't work with bricks and mortar and concrete and steel and glass, but you work with trees, with bushes, with flowers, with nature. And yet the designer is present, but the way the designer manifests himself or herself is could find an infinite variety of ways of expression. Yeah, I know a landscape designer in Chile. She's excellent, and she works in a very abstract and modern way, and she is a gardener who loves nature, but her interaction with nature, Teresa Müller, she's very, very creative, and in fact at times she's more so-called modern and avant-garde than the architects of the houses or the buildings that she creates the landscape design around. Here, because we do have this interaction between architecture, meaning buildings, and the gardens and the parks. And usually, the architect builds the building, and then the gardener or the landscape architect comes afterwards and accommodates nature in the shadow of the building, so to speak. But what if we work for a change the other way around? What if we design first the garden and then we build the building to match the garden, and not to have the garden match the building? It's possible, and I know some people thought of it too. Anyway, these are some drawings. They seem to be very innocent, and it's 18th century, but he built. I mean, if I am to use this verb, to build, he designed these things, and there were plans. So he was a planner, even if he invited certain levels of spontaneity that are almost unavoidable when you handle nature. This is a garden. Again, this presentation is just an incipient effort. it deserves an ample study, and I'm sure, I hope some people will do it, and maybe hopefully myself too, in the near future. Trentham and Staffordshire. Um, what I see here, I never visited any of his gardens on the soil for which they were created, but I see an idealized version of nature, an Arcadia. Maybe this would irritate some people, those who do not believe in Arcadia. But it is the vision of a man who wanted peace with nature, and was interested in, maybe not so different from André Le Notre, although the means, as you see, they are very different in terms of design. But this calmness that is a result of some kind of an harmony between man and the world, or man and nature, man and the sky, yeah, there is also here also geometry. There are fountains. There are symmetries. But all in all, the British design is very different from the French one. Yes, there are here sculptures too, but there is also a form of allowing nature to manifest itself in sometimes puzzling ways, if I can say so. With there is a flower labyrinth. You are going to see it. It seems that the British gardener allows for a higher degree of freedom for nature, and the concept, the so-called concept, to use a word I don't usually use and I kind of dislike, the concept of being romantic is different. It's a different. It's actually interesting why the British. But they also, when we think about the 19th century England, the Victorian era, the second half of the 19th century, there was, but not only the second half of the 20th century. In Great Britain, and the neo-Gothic art and architecture, start with architecture. Architecture was very, very admired and influenced. And that neo-Gothicism could be somehow related also to a different kind of design in the field of gardens and parks. Allowing for levels like, for example, in a few days, if not the day after tomorrow, it will be a chance to talk about John Ruskin. Now,
yeah, and the rudeness of Gothic architecture is a very influential essay.
Yes.
And
yes, and so there is something in the sensibility of Great Britain of the 19th century, and maybe not just of the 19th century, a certain liking for the imperfections of either nature or buildings, those very imperfections that John Ruskin admired and even promoted in the Gothic, in his understanding of the Gothic architecture. It was Pugin. I think Pugin's birthday will also be soon, so we'll talk about him as well, and his, almost fanatical promotion of the neo-Gothic. That man, until he was 40, when he died mad, built more than 40 cathedrals, besides other buildings, and besides publishing and books with Gothic furniture and so on. So the Gothic was part of the 19th century England. Here we are in the 18th century, but it was, yes, it's not quite, you cannot truly say that it's an explicit relationship between the Gothicism of the 19th century and what we see here in the gardens and the parks. But there is yes, there is a calmness. From what I see, it's a calmness, and actually from what I read, Lancelot Capability Brown, later on he was he entered into a cone of shadow. He was not so admired because the taste of the Victorian era was towards more tumultuous, dramatic gardens. the calmness of Brown was not so much admired any longer in the 19th century. But this calmness was almost, you could say, is the accalmie of the calmness before the tempest. It's an Arcadia, yes, and it's an Arcadia that unfortunately was also, I understood he was accused of neglecting the fate of many villages, poor villages that had to be destroyed in order, or replaced, banished to other places in order to make room for these idealized versions of nature. Yeah, there are problems always. From what I read, this practice happened also before the time of Laszlo Capability Brown. So I don't know. I don't know if he was an elitist or not, but when I look at the landscapes he designed, I don't see that abusive presence of an authority. Quite the opposite. I see nature that is conducive to inspiring democratic enjoyment. And now, of course, not everybody was, was able to arrive in these magnificent landscapes. But again, his landscape design didn't express, I think, authority. There is multiplicity in unity. There is some kind of an enjoyment of all parts contributing to the symphonic work. As one critic said that without Laszlo Capability Brown, nature would not have achieved its greatest potential. I mentioned something similar when I talked about André Le Notre. Maybe this is also, I don't know, it's kind of a wishful thinking, from human beings, but maybe it's true. It's true. This floral labyrinth, first of all, we have flowers and then we have the labyrinth. And so the flowers are part of the cosmos that God created. The labyrinth is a human invention which is scandalous for the intelligence, as it was described, because it is confusing. It is a labyrinth. But to get lost in a flower labyrinth must be something, I think, very, very nice. And look at these flowers. Look at these. I think we can learn a lot from flowers, from their modesty and their, perishability. They are very, very vulnerable. They are like the butterflies. Try to read, if you didn't yet, that short poem by Brodsky, Joseph Brodsky, The Butterfly. The butterfly it almost doesn't exist. And the flowers also are very, very fragile. But in their fragility, I think they express an intensity of feeling and of beauty that it's hard to compete with. Just like the butterfly, which is almost quintessential, it's almost, I don't know, a summum, a maximum of, it's a condensation of beauty. So are the flowers. So maybe in the yin and yang of nature and life, what is very, very vulnerable has an intrinsic power, just as Lao Tzu said that, that there is a power in water, that very water that seems to be so vulnerable vis-a-vis the rock, the stone. Yet he said water in time erodes the strongest rock and the strongest stone. And the stone, the flowers also, they don't last for a long time. But their beauty proclaim the infinity of nature, the generosity of cosmos, the infallibility of beauty. This fragility is something I think we can learn from a lot. Flowers, plants in general, they teach us a lot. And I don't know about this. This is indeed what in 250 years ago, Laszlo Brown envisioned or designed. Maybe yes, maybe not, but there are all kind. I imagine some of, these gardens are considered his work in terms of design. And, the fact that he combined various kinds of plants, I don't know if they are as he saw them, as he envisioned them 250 years ago. I actually don't know how a garden, a park could be kept, you know, true to the original design for so long. I don't know. But from what I read, these gardens, these parks are still his, and there are a good number of them that are still alive, and they can be visited, as you can see right here in this picture. Um, anyway, the green is beautiful, the flowers are beautiful, the plants are beautiful, and they give us oxygen for free. I mean, they are so generous, and I don't think we appreciate them enough, really. I know I said something outrageous. I said to a professor here, I said, for me, a blade of grass is more important than the Parthenon. And he looked in astonishment. And I said, yes, because a blade of grass is alive. It grows towards light. The Parthenon doesn't grow towards light. It is magnificent. I love Tinos and Callicrates. I love the temple of the philosophers, architects, although I like one even more that is not so famous, not far away from it, but that's another story. But the blade of grass is alive. Do we understand truly the meaning alive of the word alive? It grows towards light. No building, doesn't matter how magnificent, grows towards light. But the blade of grass that we just step on indifferently grows towards light if we don't step on it. Anyway, what can we say? This is the work of God, you know. I don't know. I mean, when Frank Lloyd Wright was asked, do you believe in God? And he said, yes, I do, but I spell it nature. You know, I use the word God. I could have used another word, but one thing is for sure. There is a beauty here that is mesmerizing. I mean, look at this. Even if the picture is out of focus, but it's splendid what we see. It's absolutely splendid, even in a so-called imperfect picture, or it was done intentionally. So I just love it. This field of fragilities. It is really a sum of fragilities, of vulnerabilities, but they proclaim life in the most modest, silent, and beautiful way. So what can I say? I think gardeners have the chance to work with very, very delicate and beautiful entities, you know, with flowers, with plants, with bushes, with grass, with trees. Yeah, I do believe we need more nature. Hampton Court, this one here we have perspectives, artificially traced, strange bushes or trees, whatever they are. This is almost a surreal landscape. Then we see the pastoral, the bucolic side of Laszlo Brown, the Arcadia, those trees above try to manage to be, you know, to bring some darkness into the picture, but the landscape is so sure in its suave, you know, harmony, and yeah. It moves me now 250 years later, approximately. We still talk about a garden built by a man, the capability gardener. And why do we do it? Well, we do it because it's about beauty. It's about, you know, earning one's life through creating beauty and harmony and balance and complexity and richness and yeah, we need the above. Blenheim Palace, Oxfordshire. Not all pictures, unfortunately, are you know, seductive enough or technically sufficient, but that's what I found. Water. He also designed the contours of these lakes. And I think that the job of a landscape architect is very interesting and rewarding. To be able to work with such rich so-called building materials, if we don't insult nature with such words. And look at the plan. Um, we talk now in architecture about fluidity, fluid totality and total fluidity, to use the two names of two books published by Institute of Architecture in Vienna, the Atelier or the Studio of Zaha Hadid. Well, in this case, and he was not the only one, but in this case, Lancelot Brown worked with fluidities and the total fluidity and the fluid totality of nature, as we can see here. So I don't know if there is anything really so new in the world. The mental dispositions do not change in their fundamentals, actually. The means, yes, change. We have parametrics, we have scripting and programming, we have this and that. But the mental disposition is, can be found now, 3 centuries earlier, 3 centuries from now, forward looking, and so on. The spiral, now we see the spiral. Well, many people work with spirals now in architecture. Yes, in 3 dimensions, not 2 dimensions. But the spiral is as old as the world itself. And in fact, is one of the oldest graphic representations or symbols. You can see them on the oldest, on the walls of the oldest caves. Weston, Staffordshire. Yes, it is an Arcadia. It is a pastoral, a bucolic world. The Freudian neurotic might be a little bit disappointed that he or she doesn't have enough reasons for neurosis here. I would understand. One could even miss one's neurosis. Of course, there is pleasure in suffering sometimes, as some people think. There isn't really too much reason for suffering here, although I'm sure there was suffering here as well. Even in the most comfortable city in the world, Vienna, I have seen suffering people, and not by accident. Psychoanalysis was born in Vienna. One day I saw a lady coming down the hill, running and screaming like I never saw one in any city in the world. But I saw her there in Vienna, the most comfortable city in the world, as Vienna was 2 years in a row. I don't know how it is now, but this happened 2 years ago. Anyway, so there are paradoxes. One could lose one's mind even in a very serene and peaceful environment. You see, this is his graveyard, Lancelot Brown, and in parentheses, capability, Lord of the Manor of Penstanton, lies buried near this spot. And we are approaching the end. Flowers again in the foreground, as beautiful as ever and as fragile as ever. And Stowe at Buckinghamshire, this is also an important work by him, very ample. You see here just some fragments of the site plan that he drew, a large estate, but you see, you can differentiate now what he did from what, for example, Andre Notre did. There is a difference that has to do not just with the accent, but it's a different conception. And something like this you could not have seen in the works of Andre Notre. But you see it in Great Britain, you see it in the work of Lancelot Brown, Capability Brown. Yes, we have neoclassical architecture as we had it too in France, but the gardening or the landscape design is very, very different, more informal, it appears. It's a different conception about the relationship between man and nature. And it seems that Lancelot Brown, he was the one who initiated a new way of designing parks and gardens in Great Britain, which is, still of the present. Very different from the French one. Nature. And here and there, a palace. What can we say? We don't see those poor villages which were displaced, but what can we do? Croom, Worcestershire, Worcestershire, the drawing and the picture, sorry for the resolution, sculptures inevitably here and there ornate the landscape, as does the villa or the palace or the castle. This kind of landscape design, if we can call it so, would have been inconceivable for the French of the 17th century, for André Le Notre. Now, this is an artwork, a depiction, an illustration. It was not done by Lancelot Brown. I just saw it, I incorporated it, but it's not his work. This is his work, and it amazes me to think that this came down to us from 250 years ago, approximately, just as it is. It's just hard for me to believe. Anyway, maybe it did. Another work, Berkeley, Lincolnshire, again, grass, and here and there walls. Even grass by itself is highly relevant and even has its own kind of paradoxical rhetoric. It's just a field of grass. It's just grass, but that grass is made up of those blades of grass that I mentioned, which are more important than the Parthenon. So there, sorry for the provocation. The plants, the flowers. Now we saw this picture, and it's a nice picture. Another picture in the fall. You look at the meandering water and the bushes and the trees, all calmly trying to tell us, please don't be so anxious and so self-destructive. Please trust us a little more. Chatsworth House, I think we are approaching the end of tonight's presentation. At Parkland, the picture is not very clear, but we see what it is about here. And nature again, the more trees the better, the more sky the better, the more rivers the better. Trentham, Staffordshire, and I'm afraid abruptly I ended. So thank you very much. You still are a few people here, and I appreciate your presence.